So in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at chapters 3, C and D, and I've combined them because we're going to look at the role globalization and technology has had on influencing consumption, as well as the role of age, class, ethnicity, gender, location, and sexuality on access. And what we're going to see is kind of like how they're connected to the fact that globalization and technology have had massive roles to play in enhancing access. And that's something that we're going to look at throughout. So access is a big part of this lesson, as well as consumption and how Bollywood is being consumed. We're going to look at particularly as well. So technology has created gateways for access to Bollywood for global consumers, something that we should already be quite familiar with. So for diasporic viewers like the NRIs and the PIOs, as well as Western audiences. And it's also played a role in perpetuating and flourishing Bollywood within those audience groups. So it's had a big role to play in terms of that. So technology allowed for Hindi cinema to be electronically disseminated globally, so via the internet, satellite TV and DVDs, both pirated and not. So technology's had a massive role in making Bollywood global in the first place. And consumers of Bollywood are now no longer limited to a particular place, as the internet allows them to legally download films and music. They can also easily interact with Bollywood through access to media's exploitation of external mythologies. So the existence of magazines, of websites, also of movies. They can access the movies, stars, and songs being released 2 months prior, which as they do for promotional purposes, as we're aware of. All of those kinds of things allows access to Bollywood and to the paraphernalia associated with Bollywood, which obviously helps to perpetuate it and also provides a different avenue for audiences to consume Bollywood. Also, the ability to follow stars' lives and their films through popular Bollywood websites also perpetuates the links between stars and their associated products, which obviously creates brand appeal, which can then be easily consumed through purchasing of paraphernalia. So the existence of these websites, as well as social media sites, has allowed for perpetuation of their identity, especially with specific paraphernalia and brands, which then means that individuals can consume those products by getting links to the clothes that they're wearing or the products that they're selling and easily purchase them. So consume the stars as well as the films themselves. And other examples could be also like people buying costumes or their favorite costumes worn in a film, which are readily made available online, and they can be easily purchased and shipped within weeks. So the internet's had a massive role to play in terms of how easily not only the films can be consumed, but also the paraphernalia related to those films can be consumed. And then obviously the combining of not just stars being on Facebook, but filmmakers as well being on Facebook. So combining show business and social media. So for example, Bollywood filmmaker Oni used Facebook to encourage consumers to raise funds for him, which for the film I Am, and was successful in raising almost 10 million rupees from around 400 people across 46 cities worldwide. So a lot of directors now are using like GoFundMe pages and promoting ideas for their films online to get support and to get funding to actually make them, which then allows not only for individuals to consume those films once they're made, but also to be a part of like the movie making process. I'll show you in a second. Lots of directors and even stars on films will kind of give behind the scene looks, talk about the process of making the film to make audience feel like they are a part of that process. So not only are they now consuming the films, they're also consuming the process of making the films and really engaging people in that process, which means they're obviously more active participants, and then they have greater interaction, therefore greater connection, and more likely to go and see the film. Yeah, and then also on top of that, you've got people like Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan who use Facebook and Twitter to connect with and engage with audiences, to provide information as well as to engage people with their films. So I'm going to show you a quick example from Shah Rukh Khan's Facebook page. Okay, so this is Shah Rukh Khan's official Facebook page, and as you can see, he's got promos from films, behind the scene shots of him on set. Also, he's got videos from his films, so he's got clips promoting new films. He's also got interviews about films that he's on. He's got, oh, hang on, he's got music videos that he's been a part of. He's also got screenings and like exclusive clips related to films. And then where is it? He's got, yeah, behind the scene filming of the films as well. So, you know, cut actions and things like that. So making of films. And as you can see, people really get involved with the content that they're sharing. They'll feel like they're connected to it. They'll constantly comment on it, and really gets people involved in the process and gets them engaged with the film before it's even out. And even once it's out as well, it also encourages people to go and watch it. So on top of that, outside of the internet, TV has had a massive role in shaping how Bollywood is consumed, and as we'll come to see, influencing access to Bollywood films as well. So it's increased accessibility because it is allowing people to see the film without having to travel to the cinema in order to watch it. It's also enhancing the participation of consumers nationally and globally because it's very easily accessible. You don't have to leave your home to be able to watch a Bollywood film. So Star India is a major Indian TV network. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch, so it's interesting that it's an international company there. And then it includes Indian entertainment, sports, movies, news and more. And it reaches around 168 million people in 65 countries. And so obviously that it has wide scope and wide influence there. So through the advertising and shows, Star India and other major network companies, as well as smaller network companies within India, have the power to perpetuate consumption and interaction of Bollywood, and that's because they kind of obviously provide avenues for individuals to consume films, and they pick which films that they're going to screen, which means they kind of control the interest levels in Bollywood as well. It kind of sways what kind of films will be made because film producers rely on revenue from telecasting rights. So to be able to, well, at least with the legitimate ones, to be able to screen Bollywood films, you have to pay for the rights to do that. So, and a lot of the revenue now for films comes from satellite TV screenings of Bollywood films. So producers kind of rely on that. Because they're relying on that, films, and like I said, the network companies can decide which films or styles of films they want to show. Films will be made based on what Star India will play for. So if they feel like Bollywood films are becoming too Western, then some producers will maybe halt that a little bit in order for their films to be played on Star TV. So it definitely has an influence on not only, you know, what people are consuming because they're controlling what they're seeing in a sense, but also an influence on what films will be made, because, you know, the producers want, if they want to make money, they'll make it appealable to the majority of markets, and some of those markets are satellite TV markets. And so if a certain film is being excluded because of the style, then a lot of producers won't make that because of that. And TV has also increased consumption of films, as previously audiences would have to travel to multiplex cinemas, as I said previously. However, they also regularly screen, so cable TV networks regularly screen pirated copies of films, whilst they're also on in the cinema at the same time. So that's also having an impact on how Bollywood is being consumed, because most of the time it's paid for, but there's great avenues now for Bollywood to not be paid for. So obviously illegal downloading is one, but pirating is a big issue for Bollywood, for film producers, especially when it's shown on cable TV. And cable channels in India are very locally serviced, and so they only really serve a cluster of neighbourhoods. And there's so many of them, so they're really hard to police. And they are policed, but not as rigorously as need to be. So a lot of pirated films do get out, and that obviously impacts on people that are going to go and watch the film, because if they can easily get it for free at home, they're less likely to go to the cinema and pay for it. So it is impacting on the funds that producers can earn. And because of this is kind of changing the way producers are also advertising and making their films. They need to try to encourage and engage audiences to go and watch the films in the cinemas, to entice them to go and pay for the film, because a lot of audiences will only go and watch a few films, they won't go watch it all. So the producers need to do a lot to try and entice audiences to do that. So one way they're doing this is increasing the spending on the films by taking them to lavish and exotic places like in Western countries and around the world, as well as increasing the spectacle, not necessarily just the songs, but just like the entire production of Bollywood films. They're increasing the spending in those films in order to garner interest and entice people into the whole cinema kind of experience, so that they'll go and watch it in the cinema. They're also enhancing and increasing how much they advertise and promote their films. So as I've already said, through social media, they'll use their stars. They'll also have their own pages where they'll show behind the scenes, release songs prior to the film. They'll discuss the film, do interviews, do interviewing with TV shows and panel discussions and all those kinds of things. They'll have a large presence leading up to a film being released, and they'll definitely do a lot of advertisement, as well as releasing of songs and selling of posters and all those kinds of things. They've increased it significantly since the introduction of satellite TV as well as cable TV, to encourage and entice people to avoid the pirated versions and to pay for the content and to consume it through cinema or through satellite TV. Globalization, as we know, has also had an impact on how or who more specifically is consuming Bollywood. So obviously through globalization, the existence of Western values and styles within Bollywood has increased viewership as well as decreased viewership globally. So it's obviously increased viewership for a lot of people within Western countries, but then had an impact in decreasing viewership amongst the more conservative cultures. So an increase in Western lifestyles, which has been seen through the portrayal of Indian diaspora. So like in Love Ajkal, focusing on the the non-resident Indians rather than Indians within India, with combining this also with Western film techniques, so the reduction of songs and also the styles in which the songs are done. Usually the songs are very fanciful, and they're based kind of in, the ideas and the emotions of the person, not necessarily based or centered in reality. Whereas a lot of more modern films like Love Ajkal are moving away from that, and their music and their songs are more realistic. So the twist song is they're at a nightclub and there's a circus going on. So it's an entertainment thing. So you'd expect to see dancing and music. So it's kind of existing in greater reality. And that's a trend that we're seeing a lot in Bollywood films more currently, is that whilst there are songs and they're pretty fanciful and they're pretty spectacle, sorry, not fanciful, they're pretty big and they're pretty spectacle, they're more centered in reality than not. So whilst they're still portraying ideals and emotions, they're less fanciful and more realistic. And then on top of that, also including Western values like individualism, sexualization of women, as well as some ideals of feminism, which all of this combined together is leading to greater NRI and PIO and Western viewers consuming Bollywood. So a greater increase in the amounts in which they're consuming it. Which is also increasing the consumption of paraphernalia, as these groups, so NRIs, PIOs and Western values, have a far greater disposable income than most Indians, because a lot of Indians are poor in India, and so because they have a higher disposable income, they're more likely to purchase paraphernalia and associated products with the stars and with the films themselves. And so obviously it also is enhancing or increasing the amount that paraphernalia is being consumed by viewers of Bollywood as well. And like I said previously, this is seeing a decrease in conservative viewership. And we can see this through the fact that globally during the Cold War, it was countries like Afghanistan and in Asia that were the largest viewerships of Bollywood outside of India. However, now that's decreased significantly, and what we're really seeing is that the major viewers now are the NRIs and the PIOs and growing Western audiences. So there's definitely been a shift. and that shift has been moving away from conservative cultures to Western cultural viewing. So obviously that increasing of those Western values is having a decreasing impact on conservative cultures, because they feel Bollywood is less relatable or reflective to their cultural values. This is both outside of India as well as within India. And then obviously the inclusion of Western ideals and values and lifestyles means that greater Western audiences are able to or will view Bollywood. Okay, so now we're going to kind of combine those two, so looking at the changes in technology and globalization and focusing on access. How is this influencing access? So technology has had a massive role in increasing access to Bollywood films, as we're going to come and see. Pretty much any barrier that there was to access to accessing Bollywood films has kind of been diminished through technology and to some extent globalization. So I'm just going to reiterate the things that we've already kind of looked at. So obviously satellite TV is one. Internet and streaming services like YouTube and Netflix. Netflix is a big one. Cable TV and showing of pirated films as well. So that's had a massive impact on, the access to Bollywood films, especially within India. And then obviously social media through Facebook and Twitter, providing access through those means is enabling people to connect with and associate with the films, not necessarily watching the films themselves, but connecting to the people that are involved in the popular culture as well. So these all serve to enhance and improve the ease and convenience of accessing Bollywood, and they've also served to break down any location barriers or restrictions in access. So both in financially as well as socially. So they've really restricted, so technology's really helped to decrease the barriers in accessing films by not having to pay for it so much, as well as barriers in having to being allowed to go and see the films due to several issues like gender and age, which we'll come to look at as well as wealth to some extent. So this has meant issues with class and location have been decreased. They still exist, but they don't have as much of a barrier to access as they previously did because of technology. Sexuality, as we'll see, has never really had a major role in reducing access, and age and gender and ethnicity are pretty much no longer a factor. And this is all kind of tied into technology as well as to some extent globalization, and how that's played a massive role in kind of increasing access to the films. So location originally had quite significant restrictions in terms of who could and couldn't access the films, and it still does to some extent have influence on access to Bollywood films, both nationally and globally. So cities have widespread access through sheer number of cinemas available, and so this is a continuation of access issues. So there are 240 cinemas in Mumbai and Delhi, and 849 screens in between those two cities. So as we can see, there's a massive amount of cinemas available to individuals, which means being able to travel to and watch a film is pretty easy to do if you live in those cities. However, rural India have less cinemas, and this is especially due to the fact that the government has implemented laws restricting building of cinemas near schools, places of worship, residential areas, colleges and government buildings, which is, when you think about it, in a town, it's pretty much the entire area in the town is either residential or filled with schools or potentially colleges or places of worship or government buildings. So it's very hard to build a cinema in a lot of these cities, a lot of these smaller towns, because that's kind of all the land that's available. Essentially, you can only build the cinema out in the middle of nowhere that's not around anything, or near shopping centres, which small towns don't really have major shopping areas. So it really restricts where cinemas can be built, which means it affects how much the individuals in those areas can consume Bollywood films. And previously that had a massive impact on how much people could consume the films. However, as we know, satellite TV regularly screens Bollywood films, and there's also travelling cinemas or tent cinemas, which help to aid these restrictions, because producers would pay for people to travel around India, and they would pay the people to run, pay people to run the film and show it to individuals in rural areas. So they travel around townships. So obviously that would limit to the extent to which that people couldn't access the films because there was no cinema. And then on top of that, you've also got piracy and the screening of pirated films on cable TV, which also helps to provide access to audiences. So again, decreases that barrier based on the fact that there's no cinema available to them. And then obviously on top of that as well, you've got illegal downloading, which also enables access. Now, outside of illegal downloading, access is increased because there's the travelling tent cinemas and the showing of films on satellite TV or cable TV. Again, though, these individuals are restricted to what is available to them. So they're restricted to what is actually being shown on TV or on those travelling tent cinemas. And they tend to only show the really, really popular films on TV, or they only really screen the really big popular films in the tent cinemas. So because of that, it definitely does have some restriction on what the individuals can access, because if you're going to a cinema, you can pay to watch whatever film you want, but if you're relying on the TV networks to screen it, then you can only really watch what they're going to screen. So whilst access is improved significantly because of technology, it's not 100% the same as being able to just go and pay and watch. That's outside of illegal downloading. Obviously, illegal downloading has had a massive impact on providing access to a lot of films. Also globally, Bollywood films, access to Bollywood films have increased significantly recently. So because Bollywood films have become so popular in Western countries, and the increase of technology, which has made it easier for Bollywood films to be spread, it's easily accessible, or more easily accessible than it was initially. So initially, most people relied heavily on selling of pirated copies of VCR and DVD films. So you could only really access those films in pretty much dedicated Indian Bollywood stores, so places dedicated to selling Bollywood films. And most of my friends, when they were in high school, they probably would wait till a friend travelled or a family member travelled to Southeast Asian countries or to India themselves, and they would buy a whole bunch of DVDs and bring them back. So getting access to the films was a lot more difficult even just 10 years ago, and that was because there wasn't that much technology available. Also, it wasn't as popular in Australia and Western countries as it is now. So, because of the popularity of Bollywood films, regular screening of new releases in cinemas are constant. So, cinemas like Castle Hill, Liverpool, George Street, all like event cinemas, they do regular screenings of new release Bollywood films. Now, they don't do a massive amount of Bollywood films. They definitely don't screen all of the films that come out, but they regularly, every fortnight, will screen a Bollywood film, or at least ones that are really popular when they come out, and that's definitely increasing the ability to access these films, especially in the cinema. Also, on top of that, you've got the streaming services like YouTube and Netflix, which has obviously had a massive impact on increasing accessibility, as you can access these films legally and still pay for them at home now, which obviously makes it much easier to be able to access it. Also, with the inclusion of subtitles, it again enhances the amount in which individuals in these Western countries can access it. And then on top of that, you've also got illegal downloading, which is a massive contributor to accessibility because you don't have to pay for it and you can pick what films you want to watch. You don't have to wait for Netflix or for a cinema to screen it. You can download it yourself and watch it whenever you like. So definitely having an impact on increasing accessibility there. However, Pakistan and Bangladesh governments banned the screening of Bollywood films, and this is because of the continuing conflict between Bangladesh, Pakistan and India. There's massive conflicts going over mostly of who should control a certain area, so Kashmir, and kind of conflicts between India, Pakistani and Bangladesh, which is ongoing, you don't really need to know about. But because of those conflicts, Pakistani government and the Bangladesh government banned Bollywood in their country. But this has been relaxed a little bit because the conflict has kind of subsided a little bit since 2006, as Taj Mahal and Mughal Azam were screened in Pakistani and Bangladeshi cinemas. On top of that, pirated films and illegal online downloading have always kind of played a role, as well as screening Bollywood films on Pakistani cable TV, has all kind of reduced the restrictions around access, which means that Bollywood again is still very easily accessible in these areas, even if there's restrictions on what they can watch. So technology again has had a massive impact on reducing barriers of access based on class. So initially poorer families had to be selective as to which films they watched, as it could be quite expensive when you think about it. Poorer Indians within India previously used to have larger families. And because of this, it would be quite expensive to take a whole family to the cinema. And as we know, Bollywood is meant to be a family experience, so that usually would go with family members. But they would have to be selective in what they would watch because it was too expensive to take all of them all the time. Also, cineplexes have class-based seating. So cheaper seats would be usually up the back in stalls, and then the more expensive seats would be on the balconies closer to the screen, which again increases or decreases how much people can kind of interact with the film, because further up back it's harder to see and harder to hear, and then obviously closer up you can engage with the film more because you're more immersed in it because you're closer, and it's easy to hear and see. And then obviously the introduction of satellite and cable TV has increased access because it's more affordable. They don't have to pay as much. Cable TV and satellite TV is much cheaper than going and taking a family to the movies once a week. So it's much more accessible because it's cheaper for poorer families, especially those in rural areas as well, because having to travel to the cinema can also be quite expensive. And then in spite of this, again, access is still restricted to the fact that individuals can only watch what is chosen to be screened on TV or in tent cinemas. So whereas wealthier families can choose which films they watch in the cinema. So there are slight restrictions to access in the sense that poorer as well as rural areas are relying on what TV companies decide to screen on the TV and what tent cinemas decide to screen, rather than having individual choice on what they want to watch. So lastly, we're going to look at gender, age, ethnicity, and sexuality. So technology again has played a significant role in enhancing access for each factor. So gender, there was always kind of limited restrictions. It never really affected too much on what gender you were. That never really affected whether or not you could watch Bollywood films. And it's always been appealable or available to both genders. So Bollywood films, as we know, is made for the masses, and so it's made to be relevant and associated and connected to the masses. So it appeals to both men and women. So there's been very limited restrictions around watching films or consuming Bollywood anyway. However, there are slight restrictions in India, so due to cultural restrictions around women's movements and behaviours in India, it's harder for women to attend cinemas alone or with other women. That women aren't really allowed to be out by themselves. Like, it's not illegal, but socially it's not accepted for women to be out by themselves. And so that obviously restricts their access to cinemas, especially because of the fact that women kind of were expected to segregate themselves from the lower working class men, that a lot of them would pay to go and sit in the stalls. And so they had to pay to sit in the more expensive seated areas in order to segregate themselves, which means if they couldn't afford to do that, they can't go and watch the movies. And also, like I said, they really weren't allowed to be out much, so obviously that would impact. However, as we know, technology has made that more accessible, because now women don't need to go to the cinemas in order to watch the films because of satellite TV, because of the internet and all those kinds of things. So technology has had an impact on pretty much making gender irrelevant in terms of access. It's also pretty much made age irrelevant for access. Again, the only slight restriction is the fact that there are classifications which can restrict some viewing. So the Indian Film Censor Board enforce classifications like our classifications here, like PG, G, MA, R, which do have some restrictions on who can and cannot go and watch a film in the cinema. So their classifications are U, which is universal, so suitable for all; UAI, which is universal with parental guidance and is not suitable for people under the age of 12; and then A, adult, which is not suitable for anyone under the age of 18. So if you want to go and watch a film in the cinema, and you are under the age of 18, It's much harder for you to do that if it's an A-rated film because it's only for adults. So it does restrict to some extent. But in saying that, again, the access to internet, satellite TV, and all those kinds of things, again, pretty much breaks down that barrier. So any film they can't go and watch in the cinema, they can always illegally download or get access to pirated versions or just watch it on satellite TV or on Netflix. Ethnicity has pretty much been discussed with globalization. So through Pakistani and Bangladesh, there were some restrictions on access based on their government's conflict with India, and therefore restricting or banning the screening of Bollywood films. So that obviously does have an impact on how much they can access, because even though it's been relaxed, they still don't screen that many Bollywood films. However, that's pretty much the only restriction, as the caste system does not affect access. It's never Bollywood films have always been made for the masses, so they've never been tailored to one specific caste group, and therefore it doesn't really restrict access based on what caste system you're a part of in India. And then obviously lastly, we have sexuality. As we know, most Bollywood films focus on heterosexual relationships. However, we're starting to see an increase in homosexual characters or assumptions of homosexual characters within Bollywood films. There was one in Humpty Sharma, which there was they thought that the guy that was being arranged to be married to the girl, the main character, was gay, and they tried to get their friend to what's the word I'm looking for, to seduce him. And then in Student of the Year, if you haven't watched it yet, you'll see that the principal is potentially gay. They never really clearly address it, but he definitely has stereotypical characteristics that make him appear gay, and it's kind of subtly discussed as him being gay. So there's growing presence of homosexuality in Bollywood films, which is affecting the relatability. But outside of that, again, there are no restrictions. So there's no laws banning homosexual couples from going to watch the films, although within India, homosexuality is not really allowed or accepted. So that obviously would have restrictions, but Bollywood itself is not restricted based on sexuality.